God designed us to be overcomers, not to be victims, right? We've all been victimized, but being a victim is a choice. Welcome to Savvy Stewardship. On this channel, we provide simple financial solutions and inspired, radical, fearless generosity. If this is your first time stopping by, thank you so much. If you've been here before, thanks for coming back. And if you're a subscriber, blessings to you. Today, we are going to continue our march through the Bible. And we are now in Genesis chapter 8, talking about seed time and harvest. God spoke to Moses and told him that as long as the earth remains, seed time and harvest, winter and summer, cold and heat will not cease. So it's kind of like setting up a pattern of things and how things happen. There is a strategy behind what God does. And we get to be participants in this strategy if we do it right. And one of those things is seed time and harvest. Now, I'm not going to bury the lead here at all and talk about seed time and harvest in a way that's negative, because there has been a certain portion, a subset of the church who have taken the concept of seed time and harvest and just totally mangled it into a way that's very unfortunate. And they've made seed time and harvest, they've created a doctrine around this concept that just is not biblical. And God was saying here, seed time and harvest, he's actually talking about seeds, physical seeds, and harvesting those seeds. And this group have taken this concept and they've hijacked it and say, if you sow seeds into a ministry, God will make you rich. And that's simply untrue. A lot of those people have created a Ponzi scheme, but they have not created a doctrine that's biblical. But the doctrine of seed time and harvest, according to God, because it will not cease as long as the earth remains, is biblical. So let's talk about it a little bit here. First of all, what is seed time and harvest? Now, the whole concept in Galatians 6, it says, whatsoever we sow, we shall reap. And the danger here is the idea that if you sow money into a ministry, as long as that ministry is good ground, you will reap a harvest. And that's really not what the Bible is saying at all. The parable of the sower in Mark 4, and I believe Luke 8, it's also in Matthew. The sower sows the word, and that's a salvation concept, right? And even in that, here we have good seed, but the grounds, only 25% of the ground was good. The first one was a path where birds ate it. The second one was stony ground where there was no root, there was no depth. The third one was thistles and thorns and chokes the word. And the fourth one was good ground. So there are some principles we can apply here, but we're not going to hijack that parable and make it about money when it has nothing to do with money at all right? But there are some parallels here to seed time and harvest that I want to get to today. So first of all, seed time and harvest is a physical concept. So if you're a farmer, let's go to Genesis 26, where it talks about Isaac. Isaac sowed in that land, and that year received a 100-fold return. That's really not that spectacular for a farmer. I mean, if you sow a cup of whatever seeds you in your garden and you sow them out and you do all the work, and if you get 100 times back, that's not really that remarkable. That's considered normal because you're doing all the work involved. But the idea that we can sow $100 and get back 100,000 or whatever the math is, I don't want to entertain it all, is not biblical. And there are going to be people who are going to hate this and disagree with this, but I have yet to see somebody continue to do this until its logical conclusion where you have quadrillions of dollars because you sowed a seed. It just doesn't work, right? Even one of the fathers of the Word of Faith movement, Kenneth E. Hagin, before he died, wrote a book called The Midas Touch, where even he debunked the whole concept behind the 100-fold return. So I'm not even sure that book is still in print anymore. I just remember when it came out, I was like, whoa, even he is kind of like, taking a second look at this. Anyway, but how about this? So seed time, basically the concept that we can parallel to this is, yes, it works. You sow tomato seeds and you reap a harvest of tomatoes, right? I get that. But it's us actually doing something consistently. It's us Sowing seed, showing up and doing the right thing. So first of all, the law of sowing and reaping is a positive law, meaning whatever we sow, we shall reap, according to Galatians 6. And God, I believe it's Genesis 1:12, where he basically says seeds reproduce after their own kind. And so if you are you are submitting or sowing a seed of tomatoes, you're going to reap tomatoes. It's a positive thing. That's why it's important for us as individuals, is that when we're sowing seeds, that we're doing what we want to happen. I have friends who are in the sales industry, and they basically are making a ton of calls, good salespeople, making a ton of calls, and they're constantly reaching out to people and building a pipeline. And they might make 100 calls to get 5 sales. Might make 100 calls some week to get 1 sale. But that's what they're doing. They're sowing seeds. Because going back to the parable of the sower, not to hijack it or anything, but the math really is disfavorable to the sower, where only 25% of the time does it actually work. And the idea is that we sow so much that we have to have some success, right? So you getting up and going to work every single day and doing a good job, you're sowing good seeds for your future. The law of sowing and reaping is positive. It's also negative, meaning if you sow bad seeds, you're going to reap a bad reward. And Hosea says this, that they reaped the wind, or they sowed the wind and they reaped the whirlwind. It goes both ways. So if you're sowing seeds of laziness, it's not going to be good for you. If you're being indifferent or hateful, you're sowing those seeds, and eventually that harvest will come back to you. But from the work world, it's very important that we're sowing positive seeds. We're being a blessing to people and expecting that to come back to us, not being lazy or being a victim. And the truth is, if you don't sow, you will not reap. We don't reap if we don't sow. And I think about this. My wife and I started out, we've been married, be 31 years really soon. And when we started, our net worth was negative. Our salaries were really small. Things were going wrong for us. We had a ton of debt. And we just started slowly but surely working ourselves out of that hole by the grace of God. And we began giving into a 401k when we were making basically little to nothing. And we started at 1% of our paycheck. We didn't go from 0 to 15%. I think that's a really unfortunate model that some people follow and they end up never investing. We started at 1, and my employer matched it at 1, so it actually became 2. What I'm telling you, it was nickels and dimes. Truly, it was nickels and dimes. And now we look back, and that amount, and this is 30 something years later, that amount has grown substantially. It's gone through many ups and downs and ebbs and flows with the stock market, but we never stopped sowing into that. And the whole idea, let's go back and say the word of faith stuff, where you sow into the kingdom, you reap a reward. I just don't see, and maybe I'm in the wrong circles. I see where pastors and preachers that teach this become wealthy, but individuals don't. I believe us giving into the kingdom, according to Luke 16, that parable, that we're actually sowing for something much more important than money, and that's people getting to heaven. But for money here on earth, you actually have to save it or invest it to get a return, and that's super important. But if you don't sow, you won't reap. And the great thing about sowing is that there's a multiplication principle involved in it. You don't sow a seed and get a plant back. You don't sow 1 tomato seed and get 1 tomato, right? That's it. It's a perpetual. It's expansive. It's a multiplication principle involved in this. And so if you plant some kind of, say, a tomato plant, let's just keep it simple, and a plant grows up and you get 3 or 4 tomatoes on that, and there are endless seeds in that tomato, and you can continue to re-sow those, you can get more. Instead of investing into a IRA or a 401k, that the amount we've actually invested into it or sown into it is fractional compared to what's there now. It continues to compound in a positive way, and there's a return for that. And so that seed time and harvest actually works, right? Another thing about sowing and reaping that's super important is that there's many ways to do it. There, we talk about this, and I want people to be very open to new opportunities. It's not just stocks and bonds and mutual funds. There are many different ways to get to where you want to go. And there are many different plans that work. My plan is very systematic and simple. It's not complicated at all. Some plans are super complicated. And you know what? You need to find a plan that works for you, but you have to find a plan and actually use it. I think about sometimes people who are looking to lose weight, and people are like, oh, this plan works. But, there's a lot of different plans that work. I have friends who are health coaches, and their plan works for them and many, many people. Some people do better with running than lifting. And some people do better eating as a vegetarian or a vegan rather than eating meat, or cutting out simple carbohydrates works for them. There are many different ways to get there. But the important thing is you have to find the plan that works, and you have to work the plan. If you don't find a plan, don't work a plan, you will look back on your life and say, I wish we would have. And I see that all the time with people where they actually had a plan and refused it because the results don't always happen right away. You don't see them. We could have stopped 30 years ago when we had like $40 in our 401k or $50 or $80 I had this guy I worked with at the time, and he was he was a show off. He had an office at the time. I didn't have an office, and he would always, every day, he would check his 401k balance on his speaker phone. It was so uncomfortable. And it was like, your current balance is $247,000.95. And I'd be like, my goodness, that guy's rich. Because at the time I didn't have any commas in mine, probably $800 in mine. I could have easily given up because of frustration because he had so much more than me, but I didn't. You know what? You kept going. You don't want to get to the point of life where you say, I had the money, and what did I sow it? What did I spend it on? I didn't sow it into my future. I sowed it into whatever, a hobby or eating at McDonald's. And there's nothing wrong with any of that stuff at all, but you have to prioritize enough money for your future because the harvest will come. And what you have in your hands now is a sum total of the things you've done. You can blame other people for it and be a victim if you'd like, but there is no value in that whatsoever. It's a terrible way to do it, and you'll never overcome if that happens because God designed us to be overcomers, not to be victims, right? We've all been victimized, but being a victim is a choice. Sounds tough, I know. But in the financial area specifically, this is super true. And nothing else, this works for whoever will put it into play. Talking about putting a plan into play is important, but it works for whoever. It doesn't matter. If you put money into an investment, it will reproduce. If you put money into a savings account, it will grow. If you go to work every day and do a good job, you will be noticed eventually. Now, there's a lot of nuance to that, but if you don't put money into a 401k, if you don't save money and you refuse to go to work, or you show up and are just hard to deal with, you'll have nothing to show for it. And don't get mad at someone who's actually putting a plan to work. Again, talking about salespeople, the salesperson who makes 100 sales calls a day will be prosperous, and the person who makes excuses and makes 5 or 10 will not be prosperous. You have to actually put some work into the plan and overcome obstacles, circumstances, situations, and it will work eventually. Here's the hard part that the word of faith people won't tell you, is that we live in a sin-cursed planet. And sometimes you have opportunities to sow, and you do good things and you do all the right things. Let's use a farmer, for example. One of my kids' favorite movie when they were younger was War Horse. And it was about this young kid who had a horse and ended up losing it to be a war horse. I think it was World War I, and his family needed it for farming, but they had to sell it. And it kind of showed this whole story. But there was a scene in there where they had a great crop and they were getting ready to harvest the crop, and then a huge storm hit and wrecked it all, and they had to sell the horse because of it. The truth is, on this sin-cursed planet, bad things happen to seemingly good people. We do have storms of life. We do have frost. We do have hail. We do have hurricanes and tornadoes and blizzards and pestilence and things of that nature. You can't I'm not trying to be so negative or difficult here, but giving 10% of your income will not stop bad things from happening to you. And those who say that are being disingenuous. Bad things will happen, but you need to make plans for those bad things to happen and reduce the risk. That's why savvy stewardship is more than just giving and getting. It's actually it's getting, it's earning, it's saving, it's spending, it's decreasing or downsizing debt. It's giving money away. It's right sizing risk. You have to look out for those things. And sowing and reaping, the law of seed time and harvest is a part of it. And I don't want to minimize its importance, but it's also not as super spiritual as some make it out to be. There's a lot of hard work involved. When Isaac received a 100-fold return, he was sowing in a land of famine. And it wasn't because he didn't give $1 to a priest and got $100 back. The guy actually sowed seed in the land of famine and received a harvest, a 100-fold return. And so we can do the same thing in our work, in our investments. We can give. I mean, you can give, and maybe the law of reciprocity will work for you, and someone will show up and give you money. But if you're waiting for God to rain money from heaven like he did manna in the wilderness, or if you're waiting for UPS, FedEx, or somebody to show up and just drop a bucket of money off because you sowed seed into a ministry, you're going to be a very disappointed person. So get out there and sow some seeds of work, sow some seeds of investment, sow some seeds of saving, sow some seeds of downsizing your debt, sow some seeds of right sizing your risk, and be a blessing. And understand that the law of seed time and harvest works. As long as the earth remains, it works. And there's a principle, there's a process here, and God allows us to be part of it. So be part of it, right? So there you go. That's it for today. The law of seed time and harvest. I hope this video has been a blessing to somebody. If it has, please like, subscribe, share, comment, and I will see you soon with a new episode. Until then, I dare you to profit so you can practice, promote radical, revolutionary, fearless generosity. Blessings.